So welcome everyone to Pieces in the Jigsaw. Thank you for registering and being part of the day with us and starting our celebrations for the 2021 International Day of People with Disability. I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we're meeting today. I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri country here in Kew, near the banks of the Yarra, and a very important place for Aboriginal people living in Victoria. The Pieces Forum is hosted by the Inclusive Community Development Network in partnership with Valid. The network was set up in 2016 to bring people with a disability and organisations together who are interested in sharing knowledge and information about their community development practice. The ICDN meets to share information and to work on community development projects and campaigns, including exploring the development of pathways to community leadership and influence. Through the work of the network, we hope to better link people to a broader community of practice to help build some common understandings about the power of community development to position people with disabilities as leaders of social change. A key part of this work is an annual Community Development Forum series. This year's series has explored the theme of connecting local peer-led work to different areas of influence across local, state and national settings. We believe a key part of this strategic work is the development of partnerships and strategic alliances. Collaborations have built a capacity to change the world that we live in. And this is where the Pieces in the Jigsaw Forum comes in. Today, we'll examine strategies for building stronger collaboration and partnerships between key organisations and stakeholders in local communities to build opportunities for meaningful social participation and community membership by people with disability. Central to this is the critical role that people with lived experience of disability can play as leaders of change and community planning and development activity. We'll hear about some of this work today, and there's some very exciting stuff that you'll hear about, some of the projects that our local peer action groups have been working on. And keeping in mind, though, that this is just a small piece of the jigsaw, just some of the work that we're doing, and we need to think much more broadly about, all of the pieces of the jigsaw or the pieces of the community inclusion puzzle. We have a full program for you to engage with, which will also provide you with the chance to share your thoughts in a workshop discussion following the panel discussion. We are also interested in setting this work in the context of Article 19 of the UN Convention of the Rights of People with Disability, which states that all persons with disabilities have the equal right to live in the community with choices equal to others, and that we shall take effective and appropriate measures to facilitate full enjoyment by persons with disabilities of this right and their full inclusion and participation in the community. That's a bit of a mouthful, but hopefully you get the sense of what the article is all about. We'd love to talk to anyone who might be interested in developing some thinking or even a campaign focusing on community inclusion in the context of the convention. Some of this work has been done before at a national and international level, especially some of the work that Inclusion Australia and Inclusion International has done, and we'd like to see how we could continue some discussions around Article 19 and the whole issue of community building and community development. But without any further ado, I would like to introduce Stephanie Gottlieb, the new CEO of Valid, to say a few words and welcome our keynote presenter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. That's great. Sounds like today is going to be an incredibly exciting and interesting and valuable session. Now, it's my I've got the pleasure of introducing Bruce Bonahady, Professor Bruce Bonahady. I don't think I've ever called you that, Bruce, but I will. Who's currently has the role of Executive Director and Chair of the Melbourne Disability Institute. So I have a long list of achievements that Paul has sent to me, which I will go through some of them. We all know Bruce through his fundamental role in establishing the NDIS. I think that's when I first met Bruce many years ago. I can't remember how long ago. I've clearly known Bruce for a while. So he's well known as a disability reformer, economist, one of the key architects of the national disability insurance scene, and was the inaugural chair of the National Disability Insurance Agency from 2013 to 16. Bruce began his career in the Australian Treasury and has also worked in economic consulting, funds management and insurance. The list goes on in Australia and the UK. I'm learning things about you, Bruce. Should have paid more attention. His non-executive roles include President of Philanthropy Australia, and also the father of 3 sons, 2 of who have disability, and is the 2010 Queen's Birthday Honours Award recipient as well. I can remember sending you a text saying congratulations for that. So I have known you for at least that long. What else have we got here? And also a contributor to a range of charitable organisations. So I've known Bruce for a long time. That's the formal bit. I just wanted to say that we've had many, I think, robust discussions over the years, but I have known you for a long time through my previous role as CEO of Children and Young People with Disability Australia, and since then to date. One of the things that I really respect about Bruce is he has been, I say this in the nicest possible way. I think it would be easy of you just to sit back and your boys would have been okay. But you've really, we came through a time where I think both as parents, I'm also a parent of adult men with disability now, but at the time I think we both had, children, that we were both we were both incredibly, I think, just couldn't believe how bad the system was in terms of supports available to people with disability, the inequity, those early kind of days of really lobbying Bill Shorten, and that whole kind of ride, that community grassroots would have really, that was just fundamental, and your role was really pivotal in that, and I can remember when we were talking about how do we develop the NDIS, and it was really then seen as the light on the hill. Now I know we've got a long way to go, but it's a different world now in terms of disability service provision, and the progression of rights of people with disability. And, you've played a really fundamental role in that in Australia. And I think in terms of, setting precedents for around the world. So we're really privileged to have you here. I think, in terms of the role that we all play in our communities, it's a fundamental reminder to us, an example that it's really important. We know that communities are really important. So the work that we're discussing today, the work that's happened through this work through Valid, is really fantastic and powerful. And I'm sure your presentation will be very interesting and valuable today. So welcome and thank you. Before I go, I just want to say to everyone, unfortunately, I have to go and be a parent. I have to go with my son to an appointment, which I just couldn't shift. So I'll leave in about 10 minutes or so, but I'll listen to the first part of it. So welcome, Bruce. Thank you everyone for coming, and enjoy the session. And I really look forward to seeing the recording of the full session. So thank you.
Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for that really warm and generous introduction. As you say, we've known each other for a long time, and I'm just delighted now to be seeing you in your new role at Valid. I think Valid is an extraordinary organisation, and you coming to it, I'm sure, will take it to new heights. So yeah, it's just terrific to see you. As you say, we've done a lot of things together, and I hope that this will be the start of doing a lot more things together, because as you say, there is much still to do. We're on a journey, and the journey is not complete. And I'd also just like to thank Paul for the background you gave on the Inclusive Community Development Network and the peer action groups. Terrific to have that context, and congratulations to you and to Valid for setting that up. But let me now begin with an acknowledgement to country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm speaking from today, which is Wurundjeri country, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I'm particularly delighted to be giving this opening address because I just think that the work you do in community development is so important. I also see that there are a number of members of the peer action group in the audience today as part of this forum today. And I'd also like to congratulate you on the work that you do, and particularly the leadership that you're displaying as people with disability. One of the members of the panel is Luke Nelson. I've known Luke for over 20 years, and I must say I'm just delighted, Luke, to see that you're now the leader of the peer action group in Banyule and Darebin. So congratulations that you've now taken that leadership role. It's just, I must say, it's just terrific to see the way you have flourished in recent years and ever increasingly taken a leadership role. And look, let me also congratulate Valid, because I think setting up this sort of network, these sorts of groups, is hard work, particularly given the stop-start nature of government policy in this area. One moment you have a grant, one moment, the next moment you don't. And I'm sure at times it feels like you've been swimming against the tide. So let's hope that the tide turns more in your favour, that it recognises this essential importance of community work. On Friday, we're told that the next National Disability Strategy, or as it's going to be called, the Australian Disability Strategy, is going to be launched. We know it's going to focus on the importance of inclusion of people with disability in the community. It's going to include a new outcomes and accountability framework. But at this stage, the detail is still unclear. So we're going to have to wait and see exactly what is in that Australian disability strategy. So let me just provide you with my thoughts on the pieces in the jigsaw which are needed to build community through collaboration. The reality, of course, is that there are actually millions and millions of pieces in that jigsaw. Those pieces reflect the conversations that you have every day with each other and with members of the community. And if I were to try and describe all of those conversations, I think I would use more than the 3.5 hours that you've allocated to this entire workshop. So I'm not going to attempt to do that. In fact, I think even within it be impossible. So what I thought I might do is just focus on 8 pieces of the jigsaw, okay? And obviously, in focusing on those 8 pieces, there's a level of detail that I'm going to miss, but they are what I would regard as foundational pieces to the jigsaw, what helps to make community development much, much more effective, to help make it a reality. The first piece in the jigsaw is that we need, in my view, to change our thinking and our language. We need to stop thinking about disability support as a bundle of services and think about them and actualize them as a web of relationships which encourage human flourishing. A web of relationships which encourages human flourishing. If you think about that, it's exactly what you're doing. You're building a web of relationships. So when we start thinking about and talking about disability supports, we need to make sure that the sort of community development work that you're doing is seen to be part of that, and shift the thinking from the way we now talk about and think about disability services to much more relational. We need to shift from the transactional to the relational. Sadly, and this is where more work needs to be done, the NDIA only thinks about disability supports as services, and it thinks especially about what they cost and tries to minimize what they cost. So, and in doing so, in having this very narrow view about disability services, they're ignoring the fact they're actually adding to NDIS costs, because relationships and friendships are voluntary. And of course, it's relationships which help keep us strong, keep us safe, and enable us to be full citizens. So one of the key pieces of the jigsaw is a need to change NDIA thinking from thinking about services to thinking about relationships. And as any of you would know, all of you would know, changing NDIA thinking at the present time is no easy task. But if we all work together, I think we've got a chance. The second piece of the jigsaw for community development to flourish is a recognition of the central importance of social capital. Now, social capital is really just a fancy term that academics use to describe the work that you do. It's a measure of relationships at the community level. It's a measure of the glue that we have which binds us together. This can be strong or it can be weak. Communities can be inclusive or exclusive. Now, when the NDIS was designed, one of the key features was local area coordination. Local area coordinators were meant to go out, engage with mainstream services, make the NDIS more inclusive. But in the very early days of the NDIS, the coalition government imposed a staff cap on the NDIA, which meant that local area coordinators, instead of being community capacity builders, actually became planners. And in fact, 90% of the time of local area coordinators is now spent on planning. Excuse me. But even worse, it's really only their planning efforts that are being measured. So in some cases, in fact, in many cases, 100% of this time is being spent on planning. So one of the things that, a second thing that we need to do to build community connections, strengthen communities, strengthen inclusion, is to get a local area coordination back to what it was meant to be and have a much stronger focus on community connection, on building community. The third piece of the jigsaw, I think, is more funding for disability representative organisations like Valid. So you can do more community work and you have some certainty of funding. Because without certainty of funding, there's a risk that this activity will be stop and start, and that can actually damage community relationships. So we need much better funding for disability representative organisations. And I would add that that extends to your role as advocates, because in this system, which is now very, very complex, we need much, much stronger advocacy so that the NDIS is also equitable. The fourth piece of the jigsaw is that we need to change community attitudes. Community attitudes are changed person by person. You don't change community attitudes by saying to the community, you've got to change your attitude. And that's why your work is so important, and why the role of people with disability in your work is so important, because it's people with disability talking to people who don't have disabilities that's actually the most effective way of changing community attitudes. The other really important way in which we change community attitudes is how people with disability are represented in the media. We need to normalise that. We need to make sure that people with disability are just represented in the media, just in the same proportion as they're in the population. It's why, for example, I think the fact that Play School now has Kurt Fearnley and Karuna, sorry, I've just forgotten her surname, but Karuna is a person of short stature as hosts is so important. You know, they changed from having just white Australians presenting to having ethnic diversity to now have people with disability. So we need to change the representation, ensure that people with disability are included in the media. It's why why Dylan Alcott being shown in the ANZ ads is so important, because it means that people with disability are there and in the community. So we need to change the media, but also I would say we need to change local government. One of my biggest disappointments about the NDIS is that local government has largely withdrawn from providing disability services. And we need to get back to having them engaged with people with disability at the local level. The fifth piece of the jigsaw is that we need fully accessible housing and communities. We cannot be more inclusive of people with disability if they're shut out of homes, shut out of shops, shut out of offices, and shut out of public buildings. One of the most significant activities of the Melbourne Disability Institute in the last year and a half has been to join with the Summer Foundation in what has become known as the Building Better Homes campaign, where we worked initially with the Summer Foundation, but in total with more than 60 organisations to change the National Construction Code so that accessible housing will now be mandatory for all new housing from next year through this change in the National Construction Code. Unfortunately, governments in 3 states, in New South Wales and South Australia and Western Australia, have decided to opt out of those changes in the National Construction Code. So new homes in those states will continue to be inaccessible. We need to change this. We need to get the building and development community on side so that accessible housing is seen as in exactly the same light as energy efficiency. Today, if you build a building that is not energy efficient, you won't get a tenant. People won't want to live in those houses. So we need to change we need to change design so that accessibility is as embedded as part of good design as energy efficiency. The 6th piece of the jigsaw goes back to the NDIS and the way it has been operationalized. It's now a $25 billion machine, and all of its funding is competitive. There's competition to provide disability support. There's competition to become a community partner of the NDIA, and there's intense competition for the few ILC grants that become available. We need to shift from competition to contestability. It's important that people with disability have choices and can change from service to service. That's about contestability. It's not about competition. And we need to have much more force in place to collaborate. At the moment, there's no forces encouraging collaboration. An effective market stewardship from the NDIA would be encouraging those collaborative forces. We also need to get the NDIS back to its insurance principles of investing in people with disability. Because when you invest in people with disability, they're more able to go out and to be part of community. And in that way, make our communities more inclusive. The seventh piece of the jigsaw is that when the NDIS was introduced, it was only ever meant to support those people with both significant and permanent disabilities, approximately 500,000 Australians. There are 4.5 million to 5 million Australians living with a disability. But there's now no support for that group outside the NDIS. That support needs to come back. It needs to be in the form of funding to organisations so that people with these lesser levels of disability can get the support they need. But one of the consequences of this sort of funding would be that there would be much more glue holding our community together and would in its own way contribute to a more inclusive community. The eighth piece of the jigsaw is a real commitment from governments and the NDIA to co-design, to share power, and to make decisions as much as possible at the local level. Because it's only through that co-design, through that pushing out of decisions to the local level, that you can really make decisions that are in the best interests of the person with a disability, and is part of that, ensure that they're part of community. So in closing, it's now more than 8 years since the NDIS commenced. In many ways, it's been a success. More than half of the participants in the scheme were not receiving supports before the NDIS commenced. Many people are receiving more funding so they can do more things. But in many ways, the NDIS has become too individualised. It has failed to recognise, as I said in the first piece of the jigsaw, that we all flourish through a web of relationships. So the weaknesses in the NDIS need to be addressed. And addressing those weaknesses must be done through co-design. It must involve people with disability and their families, and it's got to be based on evidence. And so finally, I'd just like to say how pleased I am to be speaking to you today. As I said at the outset, I'm a great admirer of Valid and the work that you do. And my hope is that the work we're already doing with you can be expanded in the years ahead, so that together we can ensure that people with disability are full citizens and really are part of community, and that the jigsaw comes together and works to support people with disability, their families, to be part of community, to be full citizens. So thank you for the opportunity. All the best for International Day for People with Disability on Friday, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Bruce. That's a terrific opening presentation, and it really sets the scene for the day so well for us. It's I love the idea of the flourishing, and I suppose in addressing the weeks within the NDIS, that it's the strengths of community that can help to to deal with some of those some of those weaknesses. I think that's what you're alluding to, and that's such a big part of our work, is how we actually, you know, mobilise those strengths and in community. And you know, we're seeing a lot of that work happening through the work of the peer action groups. Now, I could bang on and ask questions to Bruce, and I don't want to do that, but it was a terrific presentation, Bruce, and it's great to connect with the Melbourne Disability Institute. We feel there's a real place for us to engage in some more thinking and more discussions with you around, you know, some of our work, especially in the context of the wonderful framework you've set up for us with those 8 pieces of the jigsaw. It's terrific. But has people got questions there for David Craig? You've got to have
Brian Donovan, Paul. Brian Donovan has his
Brian
hand.
Donovan, thank you. So I can't see hands, so if people can look at that would be great. Go, Brian.
Hello, Bruce. Back more than 30 years ago, John O'Brien, this is in relation to your #1 part of the jigsaw on thinking and language. John O'Brien tried to move people from looking at presence in the community as being what community inclusion was, to participation. And he defined participation as being knowing and being known by increasing numbers of people in the community, in the fullness of what knowing really meant. And Valid took up on that in some of what its discussions of value. I hope that you might take up on knowing and being known in terms of that language. I think it's worth preserving and would appreciate your comments.
Look, thanks so much, Brian. I think, look, I love that. I think the term of knowing and being known is terrific. Going back a step though, you know, the word participation is something that I think is really important, you know, because I think what it goes to, and knowing and being known goes to the same point, is that there's a lot of what I would call side-by-side activity. You know, you can be co-located, right? But participation and knowing and being known goes to the heart of actually being in community. So I think it's terrific. And sometimes I think when we think we're making steps forward, we lose stuff along the way. So I think it's a really timely reminder of what John said 30 years ago. So thank you for that.
Bruce, one of the things I suppose that I would have observed, which is probably a trend across government policy and program design and funding design, is that there seems to have been a shift away from any local say or control or shape and design of that kind of thinking. And it's become very high level, nationalized, and often very much a prescription by bureaucrats who distribute funding according to competitive guidelines. And in that process, they actually design the system in a way, because agencies tend to only respond to what's being invited from people applying for funding to do the work. So have you got any ideas or suggestions about how we shift political thinking, decision-making and co-design to the local level? Are there strategies? Are there things we should be looking at, research that we should be doing to try and strengthen the grassroots up influence on NDIS and how it's shaped?
Look, I think it's a really great question, David. Let me also say, I've seen in the chat that people are asking for my speaking notes. I will send them through to Paul, so you'll have them. But just to answer your question, David, I think you're right. There is a fundamental design flaw in all of this, because the way it now works is you've got essentially central agencies in the Commonwealth Government, departments of Treasury, Finance and Prime Minister and Cabinet, that basically set the funding framework. They then give whatever funding they've decided is appropriate to a policy department like the Department of Social Services, which then sends the, it says we're responsible for policy, which then sends the funding to the NDIA to implement the policy, but they don't actually implement it. They do, a lot of the implementation actually happens through community partners, through local area coordination and early childhood, early intervention. But there's no feedback loop. And to me, the missing element in this is that we have to create a feedback loop from what is happening on the ground, not just to the NDIA, but to the policy department and to the central agencies. And I thought about, I tried to push some of those boundaries when I was chair of the NDIA. But, it's not, I guess it was, I don't think I was particularly successful in it, but at least I was aware of it and was trying to push back on it. So I think it goes to this issue in a sense of co-design. There's a lot of talk about co-design, but it isn't actually being done. And so I think if we can get co-design embedded, then I think we've got a chance. But it needs to be more than co-design with the NDIA, recognising that it is at the end of the day an implementation organisation rather than a policy or funding organisation. Because if the funding is, it's possible that the funding envelope is correct, but it's also possible that the funding envelope is incorrect. So you then have to get back to the central agencies for that. So I don't think I haven't got an easy answer because, governments also, I think, talk a lot about full citizenship, breaking down silos, but, actually breaking them down is difficult. One of the things that I hope might emerge from what's happened with COVID is that COVID put enormous strain on our systems. It exposed the gaps between our different policy departments and service organisations. It exposed the gap between the Commonwealth government and the state government. If you were doing a real reflection on all of that, and you really took account of what people with disabilities have experienced and their families have experienced, you would co-design the system from the bottom up. And that's what we need.
We've just got, anyone else got any questions? And then we might, we've got a big panel of 10. Bruce, so it's gonna probably goes for an hour. So it's, but Bruce, I'd just like to say the local and state government connection is so important to the work of the Commonwealth and the NDIA. And, I've had a lot to do with local government stuff over the years, and it's such an important player, and state government too. I mean, we've got in our panel, we've got, wonderful work that the City of Greater Geelong have done with the PAGs, and which we'll hear about soon, and with Art Gusto, and then we've got What's Only a Neighbourhood House with Lucy here, the manager, and the wonderful support that they've been able to show for the peer action group, and how that just has led to so many opportunities. And I think one of the really disturbing things about the ILC funding is a lot of this stuff is funded at short term. There's absolutely no coordination function across the across all the discrete programs and projects that are funded. So there's no capacity then to really learn from one another, and to network and connect this work and build it over over the long term with some sort of capacity to support permanent infrastructure that supports peer-led activity. So at the local level, connecting with key players in local community to build community. So I think you've alluded to a lot of that stuff today, but how we move forward with this is the challenge, and how we have how we can have an ongoing conversation with you would be, and the Institute would be something really interesting. I know Virginia Richardson from Mornington Shire has said, you know, there's a lot happening at the local level, but nobody knows about it. It's not connecting anywhere. We need to have this conversation around the really strong stuff that's happening, connect it up and learn from it.
Yeah, look, I think you're absolutely right. There is some good things happening at local level, but it is very, very fragmented. And, you know, local government basically withdrew from providing disability supports once the NDIS came in, because they didn't want to sort of operate in a marketplace. We need to rebuild those connections with local government. Is one thing. I think the second thing, and I'll be very happy to talk to you about that, and you know how we might together do something. But I think the second aspect is, and you alluded to it, is the fragmented nature of the funding and the forces for competition. You know, because you're competing with another group that wants to do some other ILC type work. There's not enough money, and there's no encouragement of collaboration. You know, so you know, if you were serious about collaborating, you know, the funding would encourage organizations to work together. It would say, look, you know, we want diverse organizations working together. We want partnership. You know, one of the things is we'd like to seek partnerships with disability representative organizations and local government or whatever it is. There's none of that. And so it's all competitive. It's all siloed. And so there's just a lack of value on relationships, and that, you know, it's all transactional. I bought the support I wanted rather than I built relationships. That's the problem. So, you know, I think, you know, 8 years into the NDIS, you know, when you've had such a big disruptive change, you've got to sort of say, right, like, what are the good things that have come here? And what have been some of the unintended consequences? We need, you know, how do we rebalance, recalibrate? How do we remember what John O'Brien said 30 years ago? You know, like, we've sort of lost some of those things, you know? We need a bit of, you know, you need a bit of back to the future.
Absolutely. And on that note, Bruce, thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah, absolute pleasure and delight. You know,
thank you.
Yeah, and all the best for your panel of 10 and the rest of the workshop. And, you know, I look forward to connecting again. Okay. Take care all. See ya.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks.
See ya. Bye.
And Virginia, don't worry, we won't let your question go unnoticed. So now we've got a panel of 10. I don't know how it's all going to work, but we're going to give it a shot. So, so we set the question, you know, what are the pieces of the community inclusion puzzle and how do they fit together? And I sent out, we got Melanie sent you out the notes, the program and a bit of information about the presenters. Because if I read it out, we'll lose half the session. So I'm just going to introduce by name, and hopefully that will work. All right. So that our illustrious panel is Mary Nixon from the Frankston Peer Action Group. She's a group leader. John Edgar from is a Service Innovation Officer with Focused Individualised Support Services. Hello, John. Good to see you. Kay Johnston is a community member, I said for you, John, and you're with Focused Individualised Support Services. I hope I got that right. So, Yep. Sharon Bromley is the founder and head of Art Gusto. It's terrific to have you here, Sharon. Jana Hand is the Valley Community Development Worker and team leader down at Geelong Ballerine. Yes, there you are. It's amazing. I talk and you immediately appear. Now, is it Alicia or Eliza now, Jana?
Alicia.
Okay, yeah, good. So Alicia Petrovska is another leader with the Geelong Ballerine Peer Action Group. Luke Nelson is with the Banyul Darebin Peer Action Group, a leader there. Lucy Holden, manager of the Watsonia Neighbourhood House. Already given some of these a plug. Well, Bruce was here. I thought that was that's good. So, Steve Singline with the City of Greater Geelong. I think it's your first day back at work today, isn't it, Steve? From a bit of time off.
Yeah, thank you. It's
Well, thank you.
nice way to be back in the saddle to join such an interesting panel discussion. Thanks.
No, thank you so much. And David Craig, who's the manager of community development of Ballard. So we're going to give this a crack for about 55 minutes to an hour and see how we go. And can I just say, I've sent a set of questions out, but you can chip in if you've got something to add to the other answers. We'll try and give everybody a go. Try and keep your answers relatively succinct, and because we've got, I worked out it's about 6 minutes each, so you've got, but anyway, we'll see how we go. So so we started off with, I thought, David, you can set the scene for us a bit. So from your perspective, what are some of the pieces in the jigsaw and what are some of the challenges in putting them together to promote community inclusion?
Doing that in 6 minutes will be a tough gig, but anyway,
I'm
do my very best.
Succinct had you in mind, David.
So I suppose just very quickly, and I apologise for rushing, but I'll try and get through them so that at least we make some of the key points. I think, that thanks to the advocacy, the leadership and the hard yards put in by many people with disabilities and their supporters in years past, we're lucky to have legislation, a UN Convention of Human Rights. In Victoria, we have the Human Rights and Responsibilities Charter, and we have anti-discrimination legislation and equal opportunity legislation. So legislation-wise, we've got a very strong platform to do this work. We've got funding for disability support, as Bruce has mentioned. So, this didn't used to be something people were entitled to. So the justification for segregated group care arrangements for people with disabilities was something which held back, I think, many people from opportunities that had been articulated. And we've been articulating the rights of and the benefits of being part of the community since the late 70s. I started in this work a long time ago, and my boss was encouraging us to do our work in recreation to get people into the community and become part of their community. So it's not like it's new. It didn't come along with the NDIS. It hasn't come about in the last 5 or 10 years. It's been around for 40 years. So I feel like there's really no excuse for us to not be focused on the mission of inclusion in a full and wholesome way. So we've got two elements there that are really important. People do have access to funding support that should give them choice and freedom about where they participate, what supports they use and how they engage with their community. Service provision, and I think Bruce has sort of touched on it, but the shift in the conversations in service provision sector from the aspirational notion of people having a life in the community and being supported by them to do that has been quite significantly twisted, I think, by the NDIS design, in that as agencies struggle to be financially viable, the focus on capturing and keeping clients in segregated programmed activity is quite a strong financial driver. And I think it's one of the elements that's so crucial is that support providers need to be on the same page as the people they support and in line with the aspirations of the legislation and including the NDIS legislation. So it's great to have a few people here, like the people from Focus, who've been very good at this. They're a good example, but in our experience in trying to collaborate at the local level, finding that kind of partnership and collaboration from support providers has been staggeringly disappointing, I think. So I think the other point is government's role. And I think Virginia is right. There's a lot happening at the local level. And I think if you look at the design in creating a national disability insurance scheme, there was such a focus on the national that the state and the local government areas pretty much got excluded from having a say and being designed into the scheme. And I'm not sure that local area coordination was the right solution. That's my own personal view, but I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in how we bring local government into a key and significant role. And I think Virginia's right too. As a service provider, I don't think it was their most appropriate role, but as an agency of government able to influence the communities where citizens with disabilities live and who are closest to those citizens, the potential for their impact, if there's support in the scheme, I think is huge. And we've already found that where we get local government support, so much more can happen. We talk a lot about investing in community support. I think Bruce talked about this notion of social capital. I think, you know, the idea of supporting communities has to be an investment mindset, and it has to be long-term. And they actually have to have a plan for how local communities can be more responsive and can rely on certainty in funding, even though a requirement to be accountable and for the, you know, the role to do that work being contestable, that's okay. But there needs to be real certainty and a long-term thinking about how we invest in communities. One of the things I've learned is that, you know, people go to day centres and other segregated settings like what we used to call sheltered workshops, because there isn't many other places to go where you feel welcome, safe and okay. So the idea of creating welcoming places, and we'll hear from neighbourhood houses and others here today that do work hard to create those kinds of safe places where people can stretch out and build confidence in being part of their community. And we're particularly talking here perhaps about people with disabilities that have had less opportunities to be independent and to, you know, make decisions about how they use funding to drive the kinds of lives that they would like to lead. I think one of the things we've discovered is that peers are very important. The peer stories that are shared between peers is a very powerful resource. And what's crucial then is that peer leadership emerges and evolves. And I've been stunned by the contribution and the capacity that some of our peer leaders have shown. And I know in other organizations, the same thing's happening. And I think this is a really powerful resource that we need to build and invest in and support. Not with, you know, occasional grants here or there, but that it should be one of the key investment focuses for the future of the NDIS and for the future of the Australian Disability Strategy. I hope it's been built in there. We certainly asked for it. And I think people need events and action, things to do. I think I go back to one of our peer action group leaders who said, we don't want peers to come together and just whinge about what's wrong. We want to take action on the things that we're concerned about. So the idea of taking action, having facilitation that gives people a chance to get involved in projects and community activity that makes a real difference in their own life, but that also helps to make the community better for everyone, not just people with disabilities. And finally, I think there needs to be strong, united advocacy voice, not just at the national level, not just at the state level, but also at the local level. And Paul talked about the need to connect up local leadership with state and national leadership. And we don't have a very good record, nor is there much connection between local advocacy effort and national peak work. And finally, I think, you know, Bruce has touched on it, the expertise of academics and other people that have the chance to research and bring evidence to our work. And we've experienced this with the person-centered emergency planning project at East Gippsland, just how powerful it is when we have the expertise of academics coming together with the lived experience of peers and peer leaders to make a difference in how emergency management issues are dealt with in a more inclusive way. I'll stop at that because that's probably enough, more than my 6 minutes.
That's excellent. So it's an excellent scene setter, David. I think there's lots in that. We might come back to some of that stuff if we get a chance. But so to John and Cade. John, thank you for being here. What role can individualised support services play as partners and facilitating services in community? And if you've been around, I get the sense you've been around in the work for a while. Can you reflect on some of the changes that you've seen and what that means for the idea of the connecting better with community and bringing some of those key pieces together.
Thanks, Paul. Well, yeah, like David, I've been around a while, perhaps not as long as David, but enough to see really wonderful things happening 25 years ago, and not so great things, and likewise now. And I truly believe, as Bruce was talking about, the importance of relationships can't be understated, you know, and especially when we're working under a model that does breed a certain degree of competition and siloing, and even sort of protection of IP and you know, ideas, that sort of thing, which I don't think is healthy for the ecosystem that is the sector on the whole. But as far as what Focus do, our day services, when COVID hit, closed down as far as centre-based day services. So now we run what's called home to community. So it's running, you know, smaller groups and supporting people directly from their homes out to the community. Now there's pros and cons there. Obviously, with centre-based day services, you can there's an opportunity for relationships and larger groups to get together and share ideas and to feel a sense of a peer-based community. But at the same time, there's also that degree of, I don't know, perhaps protectionism is the word. And then you have a look at what they're calling home to community, which has had some great success stories. But at the same time might mean that people with disabilities are spending a little more time than they used to with staff, people who are paid to be in their lives, which obviously is something that Valid is putting a lot of work into with the friendship group, and recognising that that's an issue and that we need to foster organic friendships, natural friendships that often people need support with. But I think I just wanted to give an example of something that has come about over the last couple of years, and this is in terms of positions of influence for people with disabilities, for opportunities for people with disabilities to become part of a key peer group that provides direction to the community as a whole. And we're strong partners with Chisholm. And Kate is actually wearing his Chisholm polo top now because he's part of a group of 4 who all present to class and shape the learning of Certificate for Disability students on a regular basis. So we go into class, we answer questions, we contribute to the learning, and then we also give the students who come to Focus to work guidance at a value screen or an induction stage. So and then I've found that those individuals who are able to speak with folks like Kate with this wonderful raft of experience and information, they then share that with their friends and family. And I find just yesterday I had an interview with someone who's a family member of someone who works with us, a relatively new staff member, who's just heard about the wonderful work that Cade and the others are doing with Chisholm. So that community education really lights a fire, I think. And it's what that community education looks like, because relationships are only as strong as how invested an individual is, whether that's an individual at a service provider level, or a corporate level, or a local business level, or a volunteer level, whatever it is, people need to have the right information, have the right values, or else there's a good chance that that relationship won't sustain and it falls over. So we need to be really conscious of who the right people are to sink our time into, to really foster those relationships with. We've been really lucky with orgs like Valid, but also like Chisholm, who are really on board. But that comes through our work with an individual at Chisholm. Her name's Trudy Firth. and she's really invested and on the same page with us. But so without her, it might be a harder slog, but we're able to sort of, you know, create this relationship that creates an opportunity that sort of, to me, sits in a place of an evolved day service activity. It's, you know, this is more than that. This is a valued social role, and we're slowly working on Chisholm for Kate and the others to be put on the payroll, to recognise the input, because it does acutely increase the quality of the learning of those students, of which there are many coming into a sector with such high demand. Yes, the NDIS breeds competition, but it also breeds demand, which means more staff, which means opportunity to really spread the word, I suppose. So I think I'm jumping around it because I'm aware of the time limitation, but I think there is a degree of social movement that we need to take into our work every day, because things will fall over, relationships will fall over. You will work on something for a long time where you get a little bit of smoke and then, you know, and then nothing. That's par for the course. You just keep going. So I think finding the right people with the right mindset and who are really driven and view the work in terms of the ecosystem as a whole, how corporate intersects with individuals with disabilities living in group homes, how, you know, higher education intersects with support providers, how volunteers might intersect with people who are out in the community undertaking a day service activity. You know, what does that look like? How can we put a face to it? How can we quantify it? How do we gather the evidence? Sorry, Kate. You know, so I'm not sure. A little bit of a waffle there, but I feel...
That's good, John. It's
yeah.
good. It's good. I think there's some big issues there. I think one of the big issues is, you're right, you invest in how do you invest in an individual, say at Chisholm, and then, you know, people move on. How do we get a much more, you know, organisational commitment to the work that we're doing? And in a way, we've got some great individuals here today across the panel who have invested in a collaborative approach, and that's led to some terrific outcomes for us. But sometimes people move on, then what happens? So, and we see sometimes whole sectors disappear. Dare I mention Metro Access and Rural Access? But anyway, Cade, that sounds terrific, Cade. That sounds terrific what you're doing. Tell us a little bit about it.
I go to Chisholm and other students want to participate and what I like and unlike. What about all the things taken from doing the job?
And Kate, if I could add to that, if you don't mind, Kate is very generous in talking about his own personal support requirements, and really bringing students who are coming towards the end of their learning in Cert 4, really bringing them into the picture as far as this is what he expects, this is what Kate appreciates as far as how a staff member approaches supporting you. And things that are quite personal. It's sort of, I think it demystifies an area of support at that early level, which I think appeases a bit of anxiety, you know, and maybe gives individuals a little more confidence. How that then rolls over to how they work remains to be seen. But yeah, so.
Sounds great, Kate. Sounds like great work. Yep.
And Kate, tell them about your induction work as well.
I do work and after the students what to expect and I'd like this done. Yeah.
Sorry,
So you're
what was that? What was that? Sorry, Kate?
I like this done. I like something done. Yeah.
so how you like some things done,
Yeah.
and how you like them not done as well.
Yeah.
You're good at letting them know that. But
Yeah.
okay, you're in a wonderful position of influence where you work with students at a classroom level, and then those that come through the recruitment process and get work with focus, you also give them mentoring at an induction onboarding level as well. So Kay has that wonderful opportunity
Yeah.
to really not just shape the learning of people doing a Cert 4 or a Cert 3, but also once they come to us to really sort of hone in and make and talk to new staff as well. So yeah, it seems to be working well, and Kate's doing an awesome job.
Good on you, Kate. Thank you. Thanks. That's great, John and Kate. That's terrific. So we'll keep going. We might come back to you guys again, and you can chip in. Anyone can chip in. And if you've got questions in the chat, chuck them in, and we'll try and muck up my whole interview schedule by using your questions instead. So, so Mary, you were going to tell us something. So about Mary's for the Frankston Peer Action Group. You've got something ready to talk to us about.
I can get up from my mind. Okay, of course I can.
But can I just so you've left the day service or your this support service, and
Yes, I have.
so what are you up to, and what's that meant to you?
Oh, what's it meant to me at the moment? You know, I think for me, I know you want nothing short. I'll keep it nice and simple. But
But you prepared something for us, so you can use that still.
no, it's good.
No, okay. Don't let me interfere.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Okay.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. I think for me, when I left the day service, first thing, my mum didn't want me to do anything. She wanted me to stay at focus, but for me, I didn't want that. You know, I hate people just talk things for me, but they don't listen to what I want to say. But I really wanted to leave since when did the Pakenham Christmas break up. I want to leave then, but no, I can't. People make decisions for me. That's not for me. That's why I decided to get up and leave. But I wanted to do that for ages. But as you know, I'm Mary Nixon. I'm from the leader of the Frankston Peer Action Group. I do all range of different things. And one thing I'm really good at is the CD team. I learned so much with them. Being at Valid is much important for me to know what I'm doing and understand what everyone else is doing. But one big thing, Bruce just mentioned about friendship. Another thing we do is friendship project matters. That's another thing we did. That was, I was on Zoom like this with everybody else. I smashed it. What Frankston PX? What is the friendship matters? And yes, it's not just being isolated in the world, but that's, we would like to include everybody, one good community around us. That's what we're here for. And not just people with disability. I love people in disability world, but I think for me, everybody has a voice, but they're not to stand up and believe what they want to do. Because, you know, and also part of the representative for the board on the community of management.
For Valid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
That's all right. And Mary, what about your latest stuff with Frankston Council? Tell us about that.
Oh yeah, there's another thing. Actually, before I start looking up on it, when we had a lovely lady called Karen who, Minman, came to the Frankston Protection Group, and she gave us the information about what things we can do in Frankston. And I thought to myself, why should I go for the there's a mini council thing I thought would be nice to get involved with, not just with the we'd like involved with the neighbourhood house we've got there. That's in Frankston, the All Street, a good old friend of mine. I think, John, I don't know if you remember her. Her name is Karen Vandekay. She's brilliant, and yes, I remember her very well. And the council was the best thing I made, you know.
And what are you doing on the council? Looking at information, is it?
I don't know what confirmation we'll be doing yet, but I'll get more information later down the track, what I will be doing.
It's a very new thing anyway. Good on you. It's great, Mary.
Thank you. Okay.
Now, okay, so we'll move now to, I think it's a really exciting project. So we've got a number of people on the panel who've been part of the Geelong Inclusive Sculpture Project, the IM Sculpture Project. I'm not sure exactly what the correct title is. You guys can correct it for me. So it's to Sharon, Alicia, Yana, and to Steve from the City of Greater Geelong. It's great to have you all here. Can you tell us a little bit about the project, how it started, who's been involved with it? And I don't care who starts, whoever wants to put your hand up. Who wants to go? I suppose it'd be Sharon or Yana start, or Alicia. Is Alicia, yeah, you're here. Who wants to start? Tell us a little bit about that. Do you want to have a go, Alicia? And then we'll go around and.
Yeah, I can start.
Tell us a little bit about the project, where it came from.
Oh, it came from the first body in 2017, and it's going to be pier.
At the pier?
No. It's so, sorry.
It's all right. Take your time. Oh.
Yes, we are launching it in the pier waterfront at the pier.
Okay, it started in 2017. And the launch is on Friday. Yep.
Yeah, on
the pier.
Friday on the pier. Yeah.
Yep. Can someone want to fill us in a little bit about the background, how it all got started?
Yeah, so
dastardly bollards. Yeah.
Well, anyone who's not from Geelong, a bollard is because I always thought, what is a bollard? A bollard is the bollards are famous art pieces that are scattered along the Geelong waterfront. And so each of the bollards, which is a human-sized wooden cylinder,
sculpture.
Yep. And they're scattered along the Geelong waterfront, and they are representations of people who have made a significant or a big contribution or did something great in Geelong and surrounds. And the Peer Action Group, when they met, they mentioned that out of the 101 bollards, there were none that represented people with a disability. So what they wanted to do was set out to make a bollard that represents people with disability. And that's when they called out for some help. And that was a partnership with Art Gusto, and that's to Sharon.
Sharon, tell us a bit about the project.
Okay, well, Valid approached Art Gusto, and we're a very small supported art studio in Geelong for artists with disabilities, and said that they explained that, there wasn't a bollard that represented people with disabilities apart from the pirate. It was probably the closest that they could find. And they wanted to create some. And, would we get involved? And I thought that was fantastic. Being a really small space, I thought, oh, gee, how are we going to fit everyone in, and, how are we going to do this? So my husband's an art teacher at the Geelong Baptist College. So I thought, well, look, it'd be really good to get some kids involved in this too, just to sort of, make it a bit more fun for all of us adults. So I spoke with him, and they kindly let us use their art space. So we had 3 groups. We had the peer action group from Valid, a few artists from Art Gusto, and we actually also had a Deakin intern at the time with us. So we had a lady from Deakin working, and the Year 9 students from Geelong Baptist College. So we got together once a week in their art space and worked on these bollards. So we divided the group into 4. We had 4 bollards. So we mixed everybody up. So there was a sort of a mix of each of the 3 organisations within each 4 groups. So people really got to know each other, got to understand everybody's abilities, and then everyone's sort of shortfalls, so that they worked really well together as a group, and were able to sort of support each other where needed, and come together.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Eliza.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let Sharon keep going. We'll come back to you if you want to say something. How's that? All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think what was really interesting, what Bruce was talking about before, about people buying supports but not having the relationships. I think that's relationship building is just key to everything in life. I think to be included in your community, in your workplace, in your society. And I think that was probably one of the biggest things this project gave all of us, is that building of relationships. So our guys felt that shared goal. They all work on their own artwork, and that's really important. But the guys that have worked on this project have really enjoyed also being part and being able to give to a shared goal. So I think that would be, that building on relationships. And then some of our guys have seen the whole process through. Once the project was a real success, the bollards were fantastic. Then that attracted state government funding, and we now have this amazing sculpture. But to have the guys sort of through the whole process, going to meetings, some of them found it really boring, but it was good for them to get that big picture and to see, what the process is. Some of them were really fascinated by that, but to be, involved in that whole process to see the outcome. And even though it's taken 4 years, it's been a fantastic project for all of those reasons.
Tell us about the process, Steve, from the bollards to where you're at, where you're going to be at on Friday, and anyone else chip in as Steve goes, but
Sure.
Just a sense of it from a council perspective.
Yeah, and look, for me, this is a really significant project, not only for the organisation, but for me personally, represents an opportunity for the Arts and Culture Department and the City of Greater Geelong to meaningfully engage with a community that is often not on the top of the engagement pile. And for us, and certainly with the support of Valid and the participants that took a strong advocacy approach to seeing disability represented in the public art collection, stirred something within me. And I studied community development back in the 90s, and my first job was in the disability sector, and I've worked in rural access in local government before. And to see beyond just rhetoric, meaningful engagement, people participating and advocating for their own desires in community was something that really stood out to me in the project. The Bollards is a closed collection. So the Bollard Trail was created by the late Jan Mitchell. She's since passed away. And when the group came to council and said, we want bollards that represent people with disability, we had to say, well, I'm sorry, we can't do that. The artist and the estate of the artist has agreed that the collection won't be added to, but let's go on a creative journey together and develop a project that puts disability in the public realm through the engagement of a professional artist and with participation of people with a lived experience of disability. And I think, to the credit of the group and to the credit of Valid and the peer action group, there was a sense of willingness to go on, I think what at times was a difficult journey, but what ultimately proved to be quite a fruitful and exciting journey, where preconceived ideas and the limitations of the Bollard form were set aside so that something new could be brought forth. And from a local government perspective, I think that's the exciting space of putting an expression of interest out to professional artists and say, here's some broad concepts that have come from the peer action group. Here's how we want to see disability represented through public art. And through the peer action group and participants, and with Sharon from Arts Gusto, we facilitated a process where people with a disability were guiding the project and informing the project from the beginning to the end. And I think that level of active and meaningful participation, is something that really helped the project maintain its authenticity. It could have been, easy on one level for us to say, Beauty, thanks, well done, you've gone and got the money from the state government, we'll take care of that now, and we'll go and make a sculpture for you, and we'll engage a professional artist. But for all of us who've worked in the sector, that level of self-determination is critical to the success of the project.
It's great, Steve. It's a terrific thing you've done there. I've got to say, it's really great. So, did you want to say anything, Eliza? You're going to the launch on Friday? Get that mute off, Eliza. No. Eliza, you're on mute. While we wait for Eliza, Steve, what do you think of some of the benefits for? I'll come back to you, Steve. Yeah. Sorry, Eliza. Yep. Go.
I was involved in the whole sculpture project, and it was very good, and it was interesting as well, and learning about other people.
Yeah, it's a great thing, isn't it? I only sat in on one session ages ago when you were looking at different proposals, Steve and Jana and Sharon and Eliza and Alicia. And I thought, the other thing that's fascinating is that you actually got tenders in from sculptors right across Australia. Yeah.
I'm still involved, and it's quite amazing where it ended up.
It is, and there's some of the work that was done on it, yeah? There's a photo there, that's great.
Yeah.
I don't know who's doing that, but whoever's doing that, thank you.
And for those who haven't seen the sculpture, it's a celebration of identity, that these large cast concrete forms that create the words I am spell out the individual names of people who participated. The aspirations are on the side of the A, and the M's the motivations of people. And you know, I think this idea of the collective identity of each individual that participated in the project, you know, again, it speaks to the authenticity of the work.
It's great. It's probably one of the only projects of its type in the country, wouldn't it be, Steve?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of a work that's been conceived with, and this is an important point too, that Mark Cuthbertson, who was the professional artist that was awarded with the tender as the lead artist, collaborated with artists with a disability to create the work. So it is a work that has a lead professional artist, but has that level of engagement at each step.
It's fantastic. Thank you all for sharing that with us. It's terrific. Yeah. Hang on, one at a time. Sorry. You go, Alicia, and then I'll come back to you, Eliza. Yep.
I like this project because we all connected together.
Yeah. Yeah, you put the pieces of the jigsaw together pretty well, I reckon, on this one.
You know that I'm doing what I would like to do now, and I've got out of date service as well, and I'm now living in my own house.
That's fantastic, Eliza. It's great. It's great to hear. Thank you. Thank you all of you for sharing that project with us. We'll go to about 20 past, all right? So, because we started a bit late. So, so just, again, thank you. Next, to Lucy and Luke. Lucy, neighbourhood houses are a key part of the communities, and you've done some terrific work with us, and which we've really loved and really appreciated. So, but what support do you think neighbourhood houses need to develop meaningful inclusion, and what are some of the possibilities when this support is available?
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for inviting me. I always like an opportunity to talk about neighbourhood houses, and we're really proud of the work that we do here and proud of the work that we do with Valid. So thank you. And I guess before I get on to my answer to the question, I also I really enjoyed Bruce's presentation, and I was busy scribbling notes as he was speaking, and I was thinking, well, neighbourhood houses actually play a part in a lot of those pieces that he mentioned. So, you know, I'm really interested in furthering a conversation if that comes about. So neighbourhood houses, there's 400 of us in Victoria, and we go by lots of different names, and we do all sorts of work, but meaningful inclusion is actually really important what we do. So we're all community development organisations, and meaningful inclusion often comes from the partnerships that we have. So we have key partnerships with disability organisations such as Valid, but we also have partnerships with Aboriginal-led organisations, LGBTIQ organisations, and youth-based. And it's from the expertise that those organisations bring to us that allow us to really expand on our inclusion. I noted one of the points that David made earlier about, let me just see, about segregated activity, David. And I think one of the things that we do, I think that's really, you know, that we're really proud of is that we don't necessarily have these segregated activities. So we say everything we do, we include people with disability. And one of the things that I find sometimes, sorry, I'm going off my answer a little bit because I'm just going to my notes. Sometimes we get calls from local area coordinators or disability support workers, and they say, what activities do you have for people with disability? And we talk about the fact that everything we do includes people with disability. You know, we embed inclusion in everything that we do. And sometimes I think I agree with you, there has to be a shift in thinking, because sometimes when we have those people call us, it's a difficult concept that we don't actually have programs that are specifically for people with disabilities, but we include people with disabilities in all those things that we do. So I agree with you, David, that there needs to be a shifting thinking in that. I'd say that one of the strengths of neighbourhood houses is that we have those existing connections and relationships. So talking about the web, I think, you know, the web of those relationships that are important in the community for meaningful inclusion, we have those. So we're grassroots, on the ground organisations, we talk to people and we know what the local issues are. We already have existing connections with key stakeholders, such as local council. We've talked quite a bit today about how important that is, shifting the conversations in connecting with local council. We have great relationships with local council, with local leaders, so prominent people in our community from all different sort of pockets in the community, local leaders, and also other organisations with their own set of expertise, which I mentioned earlier. One of the other strengths that we bring is that we have space. So we have venues to run activities. That's highly sought after, we discover. People wanting, you know, accessible, safe, I think welcoming, safe and okay were the words that David used earlier when he was talking about neighbourhood houses, and that's what we are and that's what we can bring. And we're also adept at creatively thinking about how we can address local issues and priorities and be responsive to those. And the other thing that I think we do really well is we do them often on the smell of an oily rag. So I know we've talked about there needs to be, you know, increased funding in the disability sector. I think we all probably find that, and certainly for us in neighbourhood houses as well. But so in terms of the meaningful inclusion, we do great work by partnering with other organisations such as Valid, and it does open up all sorts of opportunities for people with disability to connect in the community. I noted one of the pieces in the puzzle that Bruce noted was about changing community attitudes, so person-to-person contact, people with disabilities talking to people without disabilities, and normalising and creating those relationships. Those are things that we do really well. And I'll give you an example of something that we did here at Watsonia Neighbourhood House pre-COVID, so it seems like a while ago. We were running some sustainability open days, and one of them, as we were doing our planning, we sat with our Banyul Darebin peer action group and told them about this event that we were running. The idea was it was just showcasing environmental sustainability initiatives, doing some workshops, having some discussions. And in that meeting, we started talking about the banning of plastic straws that was imminent. There was a lot of Luke's laughing, that was imminent. And there was a real passion in the room about the banning of plastic straws and what that could mean for people with disability. And I know from my conversations broadly in the community that there was a general feeling that banning plastic straws was a good idea. So the peer action group actually hosted a discussion at our event, which we had 3 people through the door on that day. So it was, you know, it was a good sized event. And they ran a discussion called Suck It. And it engaged with broad people in the community who are actually really engaged in sustainability and the idea of banning plastic straws, to talk about what impact that could have on people with disability, about accessibility to be able to go out and, you know, and be able to access plastic straws when they need them. It was a really great event. And I actually had a lot of people contacting me afterwards in the community saying it changed their mind. And it broadened their understanding of what that particular issue with plastic straws, what impact that could have on people with disability. So I think, you know, that's just an example of how creating those meaningful conversations and then shifting attitudes. I think that's, you know, that's really, really great. Another example I guess I wanted to share with you was when we were approaching our local elections. I think it was October, November last year. So I've got connections, of course, with, you know, people in the community and with local leaders, as I said. And so we, Banyule Darebin Peer Action Group did a letter writing campaign to all of the candidates across our area. Actually, it was just to the Banyule candidates, just asking them how they intended to represent the interests of people with disability if they were successful as a candidate, but also offering their expertise. So, you know, if the candidates, you know, needed support or had any questions. And so that resulted from a mixture of responses. Some, of course, no response. Some were, thank you very much for your email, sort of, you know, email responses. But we also had some really well thought out, detailed responses from some candidates, which was great, which then expanded into some dialogues, which we started having. We had some meetings with some of those candidates to really, they wanted to find out, well, what are the issues and priorities? And if I'm successful at local council, what is it that you would like me to be representing? So that sort of created that dialogue, which I thought was great. And the other next step from that is that we developed our political literacy course, which is run across the year. It's finished now. And that was recognising that if we can support people with disability in their understanding of how to engage with politics and how to use their vote and how to use their voice, then that contributes to a more inclusive and, you know, meaningful, more inclusive community. Do you want me to stop now, Paul, or do you want me to?
I wouldn't mind, Lucy. I'm enjoying it, but I'm just conscious of time. And
Right. So I just want to say, I guess, that you know, the possibilities of meaningful inclusion are really limited to our imaginations. So, you know, that we both, organisations, we both bring our own set of skills and strengths, and we're just limited really by what we can think of.
No, that's great. It's what we often say is this goes with this, goes with this, goes with that. I had to get that in, David. I know it's at Suzanne's, but it's at Banyule, I think. So, and they've got the great team there with the terrific David Hanson there as well. I must give you a plug, David. So, but Luke,
yes, mate. Yes.
As someone who's hung in there with the group when we were just a few of us, and it's going really well now. It
certainly is.
So just tell us a little bit about, you're now a member of the Watsonian, you're a board member or committee management member of Watsonian Neighbourhood House. You've been on council, disability advisory committees, et cetera, et cetera. What support have you been able to draw on to become a leader in that community, do you think?
I think the stuff I've been able to draw on is the stuff I've learned from Valid, and even the stuff I've learned with getting into the neighbourhood house, because you can only learn from you can learn from your experiences. Okay, and I've had so many experiences. I was thinking about it last night at dinner. I've had so many experiences to contribute to my community. So say if it's a community, if it's something to do with community development work, I look at what I've learned from this team. If it's something I've learned from the neighbourhood house, I draw on that resource. And then I can bring it back to the community and say, well, okay, this is what I can contribute to my community, so I can invest in my community for that aspect.
And what do you feel about this journey you've been on?
It's been, well, it is, because I'm not giving up. It is a fantastic journey, and every day is a learning process. Everything I do is a learning process and a privilege in this work. Because this work with the peer action groups and the community development work is such important work for us, for people with disabilities in general.
What's it like being a committee management member at Watsonia, putting up with Lucy?
It's very interesting, because I didn't know a lot about how the neighbourhood house sector worked. So I'm able to now learn from people on the board and Lucy about how it works, so I can bring it into the work as well. But also neighbourhood, like I'm able to give my experience to the neighbourhood house. Like Lucy on a number of occasions has rang me and said, from your disability experience, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? So I'm able to give back to the neighbourhood house as well as the neighbourhood house give me knowledge.
It's a terrific process you've got going on.
Sorry, I'm
Yeah,
referring to
go for it,
parties because I like
Lucy.
to
Yeah,
bang
yeah.
on about the neighbourhood house, but can I just chime in on that? This sort of came around with the peer action group individually at different times. All the people in the group had contacted me and said, I would like to volunteer at the neighbourhood house. I'd like to be involved more. And Luke was one of those people. And so, you know, and we found different volunteer type roles for actually everybody that was in the group. When Luke approached me, you know, we were interested in Luke being on our committee of management, that yes, he brings expertise, you know, with disability, but he's also a local person. And he's, you know, we have a lot of older people who are involved here in terms of management and governance. So he brings, you know, a younger age group. So, you know, we were interested in Luke as a whole person, not just about his expertise in disability. So he's local. He, you know, he lives locally. He understands local issues as, you know, as others do too. So that was important.
That's great. It's good. Thank you. Thank to the two of you. It's terrific. But so we've got about a couple of minutes, and I just wanted to go back where we started from to John and David. Just, you know, we won't go through the 3 questions that I had there, but just by way of summary, what do you think are some of the challenges, you know, for you both in different contexts, advocacy, community development contexts, you know, sort of support service context? What do you think are some of the challenges of us in putting those pieces of the jigsaw together and working successfully and cooperatively? Just succinctly. I don't care who starts. So, John, you've got your mic off. You go. Yep.
Well, and I know this is a sort of the bleeding obvious, but truly it starts with individuals, and everyone has talked about, Lucy most recently talking about the importance of relationship building, and that comes from individuals speaking with other individuals. So I think just to sort of have a consciousness of that, and that can happen across organisations. As we're doing at Focus, it can happen with students and teachers. But I'm a firm believer in those sort of one-on-one conversations, creating the sort of germination of an idea or a push towards an idea, recognising what further grow that idea. Paul, if I could just say one thing, because otherwise I'd really just be repeating what others are saying. We have been recruiting lately from a variety of different courses. So students in the certificate for mental health, within a mental health framework, they look at a recovery model. Now, we know that that's not language that we use within the disability sector. And
sorry, John, you're breaking up, John.
Can
you're breaking up.
Can you hear me now?
That's better. Yep.
You can hear me now?
Yeah, that's fine. Yep.
Sorry, so I was just talking about recruiting from the certificate for mental the disability sector. We've learned about the recovery model. Now, we don't obviously in the disability area, but you can recover from social isolation. You can recover from a feeling of being marginalised or a feeling of not having you or your strengths recognised. And we found that we've had some really strong results from people who have brought that thinking to work, especially in group homes. So I just thought that was something interesting as far as building relationships in areas that we may not have thought would bear much fruit in the past, but they really have. So that's sort of slightly outside of the box thinking in terms of staffing. And
that's good.
We all know that really.
That's good, John. I think outside of the box thinking and imagination, as Lucy mentioned, are really important. David, very quickly, because I've got Mary on the back telling me we're past our break time, as if I don't know Mary. No. So
Look, I just think just the need to highlight that, you know, I think if we can't focus and bring together the total efforts of resources that are dedicated to resourcing and supporting people with disabilities to move out of segregated clientship in service systems into their local communities as citizens and support that. And, you know, this comes from all players, not wanting to exploit them for the finance they bring into a service provider, not wanting to look at what cash they can bring in from their NDIS into a mainstream program, but just really thinking about how do we make it really work? And in the community development and advocacy sector, there needs to be much more collaboration. There is more competition, there is more segregation of groups according to their type of disability. So they're still very much medicalized according to the old medical system. And I think until we can actually bring together people in local communities in conversations of what can we do to make a difference here, and follow the leads of some of the groups that have worked and shared their work with us today, little things can be achieved. The sculpture in Geelong, a pedestrian crossing in Pakenham that a group got up, the work at neighbourhood houses like the one Lucy and Luke have talked about. These are just dipping the toes in the water of what could be achieved. And I think until we can get greater support and strength and investment behind this idea of people changing the face of how people with disabilities are included at a local community level, all that work that's done at the peak level, the national level, and the advocacy level around, you know, rights and so on, isn't going to make much difference. So I think, I suppose for us, you know, really, how do we bring together players in local communities to understand each other's capacities and limitations? Because I think there's lots of expectation put onto neighbourhood houses and onto the mainstream that they will just be inclusive without thought about what development, what support, what investment helps make that happen. And I think, you know, those of us that are supporting leaders with disabilities to make a difference, we need to find ways of coming together and putting behind us some of those divisive structures that keep us in silos that have been around for so long. So that's
great.
my
Thanks,
take on it.
That's a great way to finish. So to Mary, John, Cade, Sharon, Yana, Alicia, Luke, and David, Lucy, and Steve on your first day back from work. Steve, I know it's been a tough week for you. We really appreciate it. So thanks so much for that. I hope people found that enjoyable. It's terrific work that you're all doing. And Eliza too, for chipping in as well. Eliza, thank you. So we'll have a break for 15. We'll come back at 22, Mary, so that so you'll still get your break, and I hope you get a coffee in. Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much, everyone, and see you in 15 minutes. So, and we'll run a little workshop. And for those that have to go from the panel, thanks again, and I'll be in touch anyway. So thank you.